Welcome, fellow travelers of the Forgotten Roads and Wanderers of Wilds, to the Verdant Enclave. I'm your host and sometimes friendly DM. More relevant to today's discussion, I'm also your fellow wanderer and wilderness guide to the Ranger class of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Let's talk battle damage.
Before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to cover some details in this new format for analyzing the battle performances of the different characters. I've had to change the formula for the baseline comparison, and I'd also like to outline some of the house rules we use during play.
The formula Chris at Treatmonk's Temple uses variables which, while including the possibilities of the game, unfortunately degrade the overall accuracy of the formula, as it adds in possibility without regard for the fact that the chance doesn't factor into averages. Advantage, disadvantage, and critical hits are outliers of battle data, not constants, whereas making attacks and hits are constants. Further, his method calculates for the round. While this isn't necessarily a problem, it isn't working well with the manner I've been tracking damage for the Land of the Hunter. Consequently, I've modified Chris's approach, first by removing those variable components of the formula, thereby reducing it to the more basic form of chance to hit and average of damage dice plus the appropriate modifiers. I chose a base armor class of 15 to determine the basic chance to hit, and then ran the numbers as average per hit rather than per round.
There are 3 house rules we use that do have a small impact on the outcomes of battle analysis. First up is massive damage. If an enemy creature is reduced to 1 HP by a single attack, I have that creature roll a Constitution saving throw. If they then fail the DC that I set, then I rule it as massive damage, and the creature dies instantly. This can result in an opponent being removed earlier than they would otherwise, thereby reducing the chances of gathering further data. Second is glancing blow. When an attack misses by 1 point below the targeted armor class, I allow the hit regardless, but I award resistance against that particular attack's damage to the targeted creature. This can inflate the actual number of hits the characters earn, as well as the attacks that they make, and the amount of damage they accrue, since I record the damage as rolled, rather than accounting for resistance or vulnerability. However, it does mean that the characters have to keep fighting those who survive, so they still have to earn their victory. And finally, critical hits. Per the player's handbook, a natural 20 on an attack doubles all the damage dice for that attack. Rather than simply doubling the relevant dice, I allow critical hits to maximize the damage of the doubled dice, and we roll the regular dice as normal. This can result in very high numbers if characters manage to score several critical hits, and even more so for the rogue, who gets to double all of their sneak attack damage to the maximum, plus the normal sneak attack damage dice. The following aren't technically house rules per se, but they are things to keep in mind as we go through the numbers gathered from gameplay. First, all players, including the Dungeon Master player character, are all using strictly Player's Handbook material. Second, every combat encounter, excepting a few calculation errors in early gameplay, has been and will continue to be rated a deadly encounter from the Dungeon Master's Guide, with one caveat. When calculating the experience for the encounter, I skip entirely modifying the experience points for multiple monsters. Now, this does not result in easier combats, Rather, it increases the danger the characters face, with the express intention of pushing the characters to use all their features, abilities, and players' wits to their utmost, while providing the most opportunity to collect as much relevant data as possible. Third, I quite enjoy homebrewing magical items for the characters and working them into the world of the game, so certain unusual things might occur, such as a player armor class of 25, but I also make them earn those very powerful items, while at the same time restricting all access to any plus insert number here weapons. Given the enhanced deadly nature of the combats, I also allow many of the optional combat rules provided in the Dungeon Master's Guide, including cleaving through creatures, though it has been modified to include ranged attacks instead of just melee. I've used the words damage rolled several times, but it was brought to my attention that this could be misleading, especially in regard to area of effect abilities if I otherwise say something like damage dealt or shatter dealt this much damage. The number rolled on the dice is not the same as the damage dealt in such cases. For example, if I as the ranger use Hail of Thorns, I roll the damage once and apply that to all affected creatures. If I use the terminology of dealt, then I should be accounting for the damage dealt to all the affected creatures. This, however, can be something that might end up being visually unverifiable, as I do not always have the recording screen aligned properly. For the sake of clarity and transparency, then, I have been and will continue attempting to record only the damage rolled, as that is visually verifiable in the chat window. Keep in mind that this could potentially undersell the value of certain AoE abilities and spells, since I won't be reporting how much total is dealt. I could try to report on the number of creatures affected, as well as whether they succeeded or failed on any relevant saving throws, but it will be a major alteration to the style of reporting previously done. If you want me to start tracking those details as well, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I will continue as I have been. There have been two primary questions I am examining in this adventure, but I chose to add an extension to one of them, as it is a statement I've heard before in relation to rangers. The original two questions are, does the ranger need Hunter's Mark in order to do comparable damage? And, are fighters better as archers than rangers? The extended question is, do rangers need their spells in order to keep up with martial class damage output? To clarify, comparable should be understood as equivalent. In other words, in order for the question to be regarded as yes, then rangers would have to use Hunter's Mark in order to do the same damage as a fighter or a paladin or a rogue, or any of the other martial classes. If Hunter's Mark is not needed in order to accomplish comparability, then the question would be answered no.
Let's get started with Thea the Rogue, Thief subclass level 19. Of the subclass features, Thea used Fast Hands 13 times successfully, Second Story Work 10 times to maneuver, and Supreme Sneak 0 times. Though I will mention that there was one time that it could have been used, and I missed suggesting it in the moment. Use Magic Device was used 9 times, including to use Spell Scrolls. Slippery Mind was relevant 6 times out of the level, and Thief's Reflexes was used to add 5 total turns, generating an extra 51 points of weapon damage, and 218 points of sneak attack damage. Elusive was relevant 2 times in particular. General abilities are those abilities which anyone can have or choose, such as feats, of which Thea has Athlete, Dual Wielder, Sharpshooter, and Skulker. Athlete was used 3 times to overcome movement restrictions and outmaneuver opponents. Dual Wielder was used 22 times to somewhat increase offensive options, but also to gain the +1 to armor class. Sharpshooter was used 13 times, successfully out of 15 uses, adding 130 points to Thea's total damage rolled for this level, which was 4% of the level's total. Skulker was used to mitigate disadvantage on perception checks, hide, or remain hidden successfully 11 times. Over the course of level 19, Thea made 75 attacks, 68 of which were hits, for a hit-to-attack ratio of 90.67%. With Thieves' Reflexes, Thea was able to add 5 more attacks and 5 more hits, for an improved hit ratio of 91.25%. Class features refers specifically to core class abilities such as Cunning Action, the rogue ability to hide, disengage, and dash with a bonus action instead of an action. Thea used her bonus action to hide successfully 27 times, 13 to disengage, and dashed 25 times. Uncanny Dodge was used 10 times to reduce damage taken by a total of 82 points. Evasion was used 8 times, 4 times for 0 damage instead of half, and 4 for half damage instead of full, while Reliable Talent was used 21 times successfully. Slippery Mind came into play a distinctive 6 times. Thea used a spell scroll of Armor of Agathis to cause 80 points of damage. Another spell scroll of Magic Weapon added 3 additional points of damage, as mentioned before. As mentioned before, Sharpshooter contributed 130 points of damage. For weapon damage, Thea rolled 657 points of damage, and Thieves' Reflexes added 51 regular weapon damage and 218 sneak attack damage. Sneak attack dice added 2,421 points, producing a total of 3,560 points of damage rolled for this level. Looking at the average per hit, weapons only, Thea achieved 9.66, which is 2.24 below the baseline for this level. However, when all applicable damage, including Magic Weapon, is added in, Thea's average per hit becomes 47.67, which is 35.77 above the baseline. Let's move on to Adrian the Fighter, Eldritch Knight subclass, level 19. As mentioned, general abilities are features which anyone can choose and use, while subclass features are limited. As a fighter's access to magic is a subclass choice, Adrian's magic usage for level 19 will be reported here. For his subclass features, Adrian used Eldritch Strike 1 time to cause a foe to fail a saving throw. War Magic was used 4 times to action cast a cantrip and bonus action attack with a weapon. Improved War Magic was used 7 times to action cast a spell and bonus action attack with a weapon. Arcane Charge was used 23 times to teleport. Message was used 0 times. Firebolt was used 3 times, producing 54 points of damage, which is 3% of this level's total damage rolled. Dancing Lights was used once, and Calm Mount twice. Expeditious Retreat was used 3 times, producing 14 bonus action dashes. Shield was used 14 times, twice for spell scrolls and twice from spell scrolls. Protection from Evil and Good was used 1 time, and 1 time for a spell scroll. Darkness was used once. Melf's Acid Arrow was used 3 times for 29 points of damage, 2% of total damage rolled. Scorching Ray was used 2 times for 34 points of damage, 2% of damage rolled. Lightning Bolt was used 4 times for 116 points, another 6% of level damage rolled. Fireball was used 1 time, adding 21 points or 1% of level damage rolled. Fly was used once, and Stone Skin was cast 5 times, reducing damage taken by 48 points. Keep in mind that this is only reporting the damage rolled, not the damage dealt. Spells like Lightning Bolt affect more than one creature at a time simultaneously, but the damage is only rolled once, then applied to multiple targets. Warcaster was used roughly 9 times to cast spells while hands were full, and 23 times for advantage on Constitution saving throws against damage for concentration. Mobile was used to negate attacks of opportunity 8 times. Alert was used distinctively and primarily to gain +5 to initiative rolls, but applied against roughly 50 attacks against Adrian, removing advantage from Unseen. Over the course of level 19, Adrian made 162 attacks, 130 of which were hits, for an 80.25% hit to attack ratio. Magic damage was covered already, but I've summarized it here. From class features, Adrian used Second Wind 11 times, regaining 276 hit points. Action Surge was used a total of 26 times, gaining another 430 points of damage from weapon attacks, 26% of level damage. Indomitable was used 8 times, 4 times successfully. For weapon damage alone, Adrian rolled 1,207 points. Action Surge produced 430, Firebolt 54, Melf's Acid Arrow 29, Lightning Bolt 116, Fireball 21, bringing Adrian's total damage rolled for this level to 1,891 points. Without Action Surge, Adrian's average per hit is 9.28, 2.62 below the baseline. With Action Surge added in, Adrian bumped it to 9.25, which is 2.65 below the baseline. Finally, Varen the Ranger, Hunter subclass, level 19. For subclass features, Varen used Colossus Slayer 68 times, generating 317 points of damage, which was 6% of damage rolled for this level. Steel Will was used 3 times, 3 successfully, and Volley was used 27 times, generating an extra 159 attacks, 137 of which were hits, for 86.16% hit ratio for Volley alone. This added 1,363 points, 27% of Varen's total damage rolled. Evasion was used 5 times to take no damage and 2 times for half damage. From general abilities, Sharpshooter was used 170 times for an additional 137 hits, adding 1,370 points. This was 27% of Varen's total damage rolled. Due to the involved nature of a half-caster compared to a third caster, Varen's use of magic will now be detailed on its own slide. Animal Messenger and Locate Animals or Plants was used 0 times. Jump was used 2 times. Hunter's Mark was cast 8 times, once for a spell scroll, 3 times from spell scrolls, for a total of 71 extra points, 1% of level overall damage. Longstrider was used 2 times, once at first level, once at third level. Spike Growth was used 3 times, for an additional 1,156 points, 22% of level overall damage rolled. Non-Detection was used 8 times. Plant Growth was used 0 times. Locate Creature was used 3 times. Swift Quiver was cast 4 times, enabling another 20 attacks for 16 hits, adding 160 points of damage, 3% of damage rolled. Fog Cloud was cast 3 times for a 3rd level spell scroll, 3 times at 3rd level, once at 4th level, for a total of 7 uses. Varen made 85 attacks this level, 67 of which were hits, for a 78.82% hit ratio. With Volley added, this became 244 attacks and 204 hits, for a hit ratio of 83.61%. With Volley and Swift Quiver, this becomes 264 attacks and 220 hits, for a hit ratio of 83.33%. Favored Enemy was used 10 of 10 times successfully to track selected enemies, and Natural Explorer was used 59 times distinctively, though passive uses are slightly harder to track due to their constant applicability. Primeval Awareness was used 2 times, and Landstride was used 22 times. Hide in Plain Sight was used 7 times, and Vanish was used 40 times, 33 of which were successful hiding checks. While hiding his trail is in constant use, unless deliberately chosen otherwise, there were distinctively 0 times that being able to choose played a role in Varen's detectability. Feral Senses was used a total 73 times, 15 to detect invisible enemies, and 58 to attack without disadvantage. With weapons only, Varen rolled 702 points of damage. 317 came from Colossus Slayer, 1,363 from Volley, 71 from Hunter's Mark, 1,370 from Sharpshooter, 160 from Swift Quiver, and 1,156 from Spike Growth, for a total of 5,139 points of damage rolled for this level. Varen's weapon damage per hit, not including Volley, comes to 10.48, 1.42 below the baseline, performing less efficiently than the Rogue, but more efficiently than the Fighter. With all applicable non-magical damage, Varen's average per hit comes to 18.39, 6.49 above the baseline, and better than the Fighter with Action Surge included. When all relevant damage is included, consequently excluding Spike Growth, Varen's damage per hit becomes 18.10, or 6.2 above the baseline. Here you see the average per hit by level for all 3 characters compared to the baseline established before. This is strictly weapon damage, no unique class or subclass features, general abilities, or magic involved, except for the Fighter and Ranger's extra attack. The blue line is the baseline, the orange line represents Varen's progression, the gray line represents Adrian, and Thea is represented by the yellow line. Keep in mind that the baseline assumes a constant enemy armor class of 15, which is not happening for all enemies in gameplay at these levels, and also does not take into account the possibility of critical hits, natural ones, advantage or disadvantage, vulnerability, or resistance. Further, this does include one unique aspect of the Fighter, that since 11th level, the Fighter can make an additional extra attack. Due to my own lack of preparation, I am not able to sparse that ability out. As you can see, without their specific class features, even with extra attack, the individual classes struggled to maintain the baseline past level 7. This is probably because the established baseline includes base features and abilities specific to the Warlock, so it would be interesting at some point to see what would happen if a different featureless baseline were made for a better comparison. In the meantime, let's add in other applicable damage riders. The blue baseline is the same as before, but now all applicable class and subclass features, general abilities, and applicable magic are added in. Prior to the 11th level, the rogues, still presented by the yellow line, average per hit climbs and plummets almost level to level, but since 11th level has climbed more or less steadily. However, the rogue does remain quite high in efficiency compared to the other 2, a direct result of sneak attack. Of note, there are dips from 16th to 17th and 18th to 19th levels. You might note that the same occurs to the Fighter and the Ranger, moving from 18th to 19th level, and to the Ranger, moving from 16th to 17th level, while the Fighter improved by a minuscule amount at that time. These were probably caused by the fact that there were simply fewer fights required to move from 16th to 17th, and from 18th to 19th, than from 17th to 18th, which means that the martial classes each had fewer attack opportunities overall, thereby also reducing hits, which consequently lowers the amount of damage rolled. The gray line, representing the Fighter, by comparison to the Rogue, stays fairly consistent to the baseline, with occasional variance, despite the fact that the characters rarely deal with a consistent armor class of 15. Do note that this is not indicative of underperformance. Rather, it shows that even when not faced with consistent situations or enemies, the Fighter is an efficient martial class to play. The Ranger is portrayed by the orange line, and has an interesting progression.
Except for 9th and 10th levels, the Ranger performs above the baseline fairly consistently, though obviously not in the same dizzying heights of efficiency the Rogue obtained. To note, this is roughly about the same point in the game where the Ranger switched to using a sling, due to lack of wood for resupplying arrows. This means that the Ranger is using a small, but significantly underpowered weapon system compared to the other two classes most of the time. For the purpose of this discussion, efficiency is the ratio of useful outcome to the total input in any system, specifically here, the combat system of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Therefore, this chart shows the graphical representation of the amount of rolled weapon damage to the number of hits. What is being displayed here then is that the Rogue is the most efficient combatant. That is, the Rogue uses comparatively few hits to gain purely high damage output, so long as the Rogue can gain sneak attack. The Fighter is perhaps merely efficient, not inefficient, because the Fighter stays so close to the baseline so consistently. The Ranger would therefore be considered as a good efficiency combatant, performing more often than not above both the Fighter and baseline. On this chart, a character performing consistently below the baseline would be considered inefficient. With the efficiency of the characters established, let's move to the damage output. Appearing now on screen are each character's total damage rolled per level from 1st to 19th level. This metric is measuring the damage rolled, not damage dealt. This consequently ignores situational aspects such as immunity, resistance, and vulnerability. As the graph's title says, this is based on solely weapon damage rolled, without unique features like sneak attack, action surge, Colossus Slayer or volley, no abilities like sharpshooter, and no magic such as Hunter's Mark or Lightning Bolt. It does, however, include extra attack, as this feature is much more difficult to sparse out than I had anticipated or prepared for. Consequently, the Fighter's extra attack gained at 11th level is still being included on this graph, as is the Ranger's extra attack at 5th level. This metric should still help us determine how necessary Ranger's magic is in order to be comparable to, at least, the Rogue and the Fighter. Let's jump in. The blue columns represent the Ranger, the orange columns are for the Fighter, and the gray columns are for the Rogue. Thus far, the Ranger has outperformed the other two classes 10 out of 19 levels. The Fighter has outperformed the other two classes 8 out of 19 levels. And if you are watching, you will see that all 8 of those occurrences are after 11th level, when the Fighter gained the additional extra attack. The Rogue has passed the other two classes 1 time out of 19 levels. Thus far, the Ranger has dealt more damage 52.63% of the time, the Fighter 42.11%, and the Rogue 5.26%. These damage totals do exclude the Ranger's magic and features, suggesting so far that Hunter's Mark is not required for comparable performance from the Ranger, though it does help a little with the Ranger's combat efficiency, as shown in the previous chart. Further, this suggests to me that, so far at least, the Ranger does not need their magic in order to keep up with the Fighter or the Rogue, as the Ranger has surpassed the other two classes more times than not. But now, let's take a look at what happens when all the relevant features and abilities are added in. Now class and subclass features, general abilities, and magic have been added in. This does include secondary environmental damage. But note that this graph only includes damage rolled, not damage dealt, so if an effect hits more than one creature, I only capture the damage rolled. This is in keeping with the Player's Handbook, Chapter 9, page 196, section Damage Rolls, that, quote, if a spell or other effect deals damage to more than one target at the same time, roll the damage once for all of them. For example, when a wizard casts Fireball or a cleric casts Flame Strike, the spell's damage is rolled once for all creatures caught in the blast, end quote. With that out of the way, the blue columns represent the Ranger, who now surpasses the two other classes 15 out of 19 levels, or 78.95% of levels played. The Rogue has surpassed the two other classes 4 out of 19 levels, or 21.05% of levels played. The Fighter has surpassed the Rogue 6 out of the 19 levels played, but has not surpassed the Ranger once. Out of 20 levels available, the Ranger has thus far outperformed the two other classes 15 levels out of 20, or 75%, while the Rogue has outperformed the other two classes 4 levels out of 20, or 20%. The Fighter has outperformed the Rogue only 6 levels out of 20, not once the Ranger, and 1 level remains out of 20 for the leftover 5%. This shows that, despite the Rogue's absolutely incredible efficiency, its total damage output is not to the same level as the Fighter, though on occasion the Rogue can deliver absolutely enormous amounts of damage. But the Ranger has, thus far, more often than not, outperformed the other two classes with and without magic, with and without feats, with and without class and subclass features. I feel I should further point out that since roughly 10th level through all but the last fight of 19th level, Varen the Ranger has relied almost solely on his sling, dealing only 1d4 plus his dexterity modifier, while the other two have used primarily the longbow and the rapier, both dealing 1d8 plus dexterity modifiers. And yet the Ranger has still been able to outperform. Only one more level of gameplay awaits to be explored, with each class's capstones just around the corner. I hope you're finding this analysis as interesting as I am, and that you will continue to explore the Ranger class with me, as well as joining Adrian, Thea, and Varen in the Land of the Hunter. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.